Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Archery Tools ad nauseum, and today I'm going to examine arrow pullers. Some general housekeeping. This video is going to end up being edited and uploaded while I'm at TAC 7 Springs this weekend. I was hoping to have it finished before I left, but here I am recording this the night before I travel. Life has a funny way of making it hard to get through my to-do list. Anyway, if you're here at TAC and recognize me and want to come up and say hello, I do enjoy meeting with my customers and subscribers. It's a positive but a little surreal feeling, and I never expected to be in a position to experience it, so hopefully I'll see you here, there. Whatever. Also, if anybody notices my left ring finger looks a little bit odd, it's because I'm missing a nail on it. I was in my garage gym doing flat bench press with 115-pound dumbbells to failure, and when I dropped them on the floor, one of them bounced and landed on my finger. At least that's the best I could figure since I was looking up at the ceiling at the time.
Dear Lord, that's the loudest profanity I've ever heard.
So that was rather unpleasant, and for the next few months I'll hopefully be growing it back. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to be going on a series of semi-related and possibly silly tangents that are not entirely archery themed. I wrote them into my script and I have no editor to tell me to cut them, so in my script they remained. There are timecodes in the description, so if at any point I look like I'm going too far off the rails, please feel free to skip to the next topic. Also, the usual disclaimer that every product in the video was purchased with my own money, so I have no incentives one way or another to make a judgment on it other than my own opinions. Archery is all about energy and the efficient use of mechanical advantages to manipulate, concentrate, and release it when we want. As compound archers, mechanical advantage is something we use in spades. The cams on compound bows are a set of interconnected pulleys that compress limbs that would otherwise be too heavy for the majority of archers to bend unassisted. The shape of the string and cable tracks dictate how the force generated by the limbs is distributed across the entire draw cycle. Despite the advantages in technology, archery is still one of the more physically taxing of the shooting disciplines, between drawing the bow and supplying all the energy to make the system work, and retrieving our arrows so we can use them again. That's another thing we have on other shooting disciplines. We get to reuse our ammunition in the same session, provided we didn't lose it or break it. I suppose those who participate in spear, axe, knife, and javelin throwing, boomeranging, blowgunning, hammer throw, and midget tossing could probably say something similar. I don't think they're necessarily in the same category, though. Archery is a shooting discipline, and those are more considered throwing disciplines. Anyway, my point is, the more work we have to do to get the projectile on its way, the more incentive we may have to not waste energy doing something else. And we have plenty of opportunities to waste mental and physical energy. While I was writing this script, I spent a good amount of time pondering what the greatest wastes of energy are in archery, and I came up with 3. If you can think of any others, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. The first waste of energy is pulling more poundage than the application requires. I know I'm going to ruffle a few feathers with that one, but if you spend any amount of time in an event with the general public, you're going to see people who are incapable of drawing straight back on a target in a controlled fashion. I know overkill is underrated, but I can almost guarantee that no one will think less of a person if they use a lower poundage for the purposes of maintaining good form. So if you choose to pull a certain weight, please do it for your own reasons and not for the sake of impressing others. We're not impressed. Arguments can be made in the context of hunting certain animals for pulling 70 or higher, particularly large animals with thick hides, but this video is not about that, so moving along. The second waste of energy I could think of is arguing with strangers on the internet. Remember, it's harder to do things consistently when your mental energy is compromised just as much as your physical energy, and arguing about the best method of shot execution, arrow weight, front of center, bow brand, release brand, rest type and brand, most or least entertaining influencer, the definition of sky drawing, and whether or not a particular pro is doing it and not being called on it. It's certainly fun to argue about these things, and trolling the easily offended on the internet is particularly fun when you have a better understanding of the subject than they do. But if it starts eating into the time when you should be doing something more productive, then it may be time to stop weighing in on those discussions. It's not a statistical impossibility to change someone's mind on the internet, but it's more likely you're just wasting your time and energy. One of my favorite books is Frank Herbert's Dune, and I've spent the last month arguing with people online about how Denis Villeneuve's adaptation, particularly the deviations from the source material in Part 2 that are written to appeal to modern audiences, essentially break the narrative and are not faithful to the books. It was only until recently that I gave up on trying to convince the tourist who have only seen the movies and haven't read the books that it was good enough as a movie, but shit as an adaptation. So if you love a work of fiction and don't want to see Hollywood sacrifice it on the altar of intersectionality, then feel free to gatekeep it. Gatekeeping is not necessarily a bad thing. Defend what you love. Unlike most, if not all other shooting disciplines, archers get to reuse their ammunition repeatedly at the cost of having to retrieve it. So walking to the target and back expends energy, and pulling arrows from the target can potentially require a large expense of energy depending on the condition in which we find them and into what kind of target we are using. Have you ever gotten winded or broken a sweat trying to pull your arrows out of a target that doesn't seem to want to let them go? How about when your friend missed a 3D target and sunk an arrow into the backstop or into a piece of wood? How much energy did it require to get your arrows back, and how much energy did you actually want to spend pulling your arrows? Reinhardt and other 3D target manufacturers try to use foam that will stop your arrow but still be fairly easy to pull out. That is, except when it's cold out. I found Reinhardt targets turn to cement in temperatures 60 degrees and colder. That's Fahrenheit, by the way, for my overseas viewers. When they're warm, the arrows come out more easily, but in early spring and fall, when they've been sitting out all night, a puller is almost necessary unless the insert is shot to hell. I may have partially derailed my argument I was trying to make by conducting my testing in 80-degree weather, and archery can safely be described as a fair weather activity. Most people don't do it when it's cold. They go inside where it's warm. However, for those of us who are too stubborn not to go inside when the temperature starts hovering around freezing, my point becomes more pertinent and pullers become way more useful. Aside from employing tools, there are other methods to making arrows easier to pull, such as manufacturers adding slick coatings to the shaft, or using aluminum arrows or shafts with an aluminum outer sleeve like Easton Full Metal jackets. As long as they stay out of anything into which they are not meant to be stuck, like a wooden fence, they're usually fairly easy to remove. They're kind of pricey and they have their own drawbacks though. Aluminum arrows can bend, and so can FMJs, so something to think about. Another option is using screw-in points that are flared and tapered to create a larger entry hole than the diameter of the shaft. Points like those work well for foam, and they don't sink as deeply into wood, but they get stuck in bag targets, and if you sink one into a backstop made of stall mat or conveyor belt material, they are more difficult to remove if you are unable to access the rear of the backstop to unscrew the point first. You can also use small diameter shafts and half-outs and screw-in points to get a similar effect. I generally use arrows with glue-in points, so these are not currently an option unless somebody started coming out with one that I haven't seen yet. You could also be a complete asshole and use the practice heads for mechanical broadheads as your field points. They pull out of foam targets and bag targets very easily at the expense of severely shortening the target's service life. So if you're going to do that, don't do it to someone else's targets. I wish I was making it up, but I do know someone who goes to, or rather used to go to, local 3D events and do just that until he was caught. His first name was Mike, and in this instance, please don't be like Mike. The last option before we get into dedicated tools is the waxing or lubricating of the first few inches of the shaft. This is where my sense of humor may get the better of me, so I hope you're ready for some double entendre. There are a number of different products available for shaft lubrication. You might even have some lying around your bed. I mean house. That would do the trick. You can use string wax, commercially available spray-on dry lubes, and some manufacturers sell tubes of branded arrow lube that is probably something you can get for cheaper but has an inflated price tag because it's branded as a specialty product. The one I find most amusing is the AAE lube tube, and as much as the jokes just write themselves, I'm just going to go in and throw in a few of my own. The lube tube has been out for a number of years, but it now has a 2.0 version that comes with a clamp to attach it directly to your bow and works by inserting the point into the sphincter at the front of the tube. It's basically a fleshlight for your arrows. I used arrow snot for a short time and found I have a tendency to forget to apply it until after it's worn off. That is, unless I made a habit of applying it every single time I pulled an arrow from my quiver or reinserted it. So once it ran out, I didn't buy more because I'm far too easily distracted to waste other people's time while I prep my shaft for launch. Oh god, I'm terrible. Also, like other aspects of life, if you use too much lubrication, everything becomes a slippery mess, and you don't want to get it anywhere it doesn't belong. So I choose to go in hard and dry, and that will hopefully be the last high school level joke I make during this video. This is supposed to be highbrow material, and I'm better than this. I'm not better than this. I did figure out a technique for pulling arrows out of mildly cantankerous targets where I brace my body against the target, wrap one hand around the arrow, and press against the target face while I pull the arrow with both hands. I get more leverage doing that over just pulling on the shaft, and I can usually get them out without resorting to kicking over the target and going full sword in the stone on it. If that method doesn't work, or I just don't want to waste any more time and energy, then I use a puller. Wow, I just got through half of my script, and I didn't even start talking about pullers yet. Most people carry some form of arrow puller, but all pullers are not created equal, and you absolutely get what you pay for. So I'm going to examine a few in order of cheapest to most expensive and talk about their benefits and drawbacks. The B-roll is going to consist of me loosing arrows into a Reinhardt block target at close range and using the various arrow pullers to extract the arrows. It should be fairly apparent which ones require more effort than others. The factors I'm also going to talk about are price, portability, benefits, drawbacks, and ease of use. Most pullers are just a simple piece of molded rubber, many of which look like a rubber hot dog bun, hockey pucks, or Lego Company's interpretation of a hamburger patty. They're very inexpensive, and their purpose is to help you get a better grip on the arrow. They are also the most portable, and that most of them are lightweight and can be stowed in a quiver pouch or hung on a loop or grommet. The catch is, these types do not offer any assistance in terms of pulling, as their name would imply. All the force needed to actually get the arrow out is supplied by the archer, and these types of pullers offer no mechanical advantages other than increased friction. In terms of pricing, the next one up goes for about $35 shipped, and it's called the Arrow Out Puller, sold by Triggered Archery. At least I think it's made by them because their website on the packaging and the photos goes to a totally unrelated website. This one looks to be made mostly of injected molded plastic, and I don't have one yet since I didn't want to drop the coin for it for the purposes of this review. It's the least expensive puller that acts as a force multiplier. You clamp it on the shaft and use the curved shape of the handle as a lever to press against the target and extract your arrow. There are videos of it being used on TikTok and YouTube, an app of which I will never download on my phone, not because of the Chinese spyware, I just do too much doom scrolling already. The potential drawbacks of this puller is it has a range of shaft sizes that it works on, which is micro to standard, but a separate insert can be purchased for larger diameter arrows. So it works on a full range, but it's not universal. I would also be concerned about its durability and how hard you can crank on it before the handle warps or snaps. Again, I don't have one to test it, so it might be great or it might be crap. If they see this and want to send me one, I'd be happy to put it through the paces, provided they don't expect me to sing its praises if it doesn't pass muster. It also doesn't look like it's the most portable of pullers. If you want to carry this one around, you're going to need to figure out somewhere to put it when you're not using it. That's not a deal breaker for me considering what I carry, but it's worth noting for others who try to pack light. Jumping in price again are the Plier or Nutcracker style of pullers. The most notable one is the Magnum Double D Arrow Puller from my home state of Pennsylvania. The Double D's pullers price range is very wide, and I've seen them go for anywhere from $50 to $85. There is a Chinesium copy, because of course there is, branded D-cut archery that goes for less, and others that look like repurposed pliers. There's one by 10 Point. I think the crossbow manufacturer, it just looks like pliers with like a little double, like two little half moons with a rubber sleeve on the inside to grab onto the arrow. Pullers like this are smaller, usually metal construction with a rubber insert, very portable, and they can get a very strong grip on just about any size of arrow shaft. The Double D puller has space on both sides of the jaw to get both hands on it, or you can live long and prosper it one-handed while pressing against the target with your other arm. That way you get more surface area to grip and you can keep the jaw squeezed closed. If you just grip it on the handle side, you have to contend with some resistance from side pressure since you won't be pulling the arrow straight back. You'll be putting side like some lateral pressure on it, so you'll be pulling it to the side and back at the same time. So you can get a hell of a grip on your arrow, but they still require arm and back strength to actually pull the arrows out. So if your arrow is stuck in something really hard, it doesn't really give you any mechanical advantages except being able to pull with both hands and maybe put your foot into it. The Double D puller was the one I normally carried until I bought a Reinhardt block target to use in my basement, which is about 59 degrees in the winter, and I was loosing arrows into it from 12 feet away with a 70-pound bow. That is the target I'm using now for this demonstration because it is 80 degrees outside and I let it sit outside to warm up, so it's going to be tough to get things out, but not as impossible. It won't take me 15 minutes to pull 3 arrows like it used to when I was shooting in my basement. Now I might have telegraphed this this in my videos by the absence of sleeves on my shirts, but I fancy myself as a pretty strong guy, and I spend a good amount of time in the gym. I'm past the point of a 2-plate bench, a 3-plate squat, and a 4-plate deadlift, which are considered respectable for gym numbers. I actually just hit a 505-pound trap bar deadlift for 4, a 300-pound bench for 2, and I could do 19 consecutive strict pull-ups. So now that I've disclosed some of my lifting credentials, pulling my arrows from that Reinhardt target when it's cold required a significant amount of effort for me and motivated me to start shopping around to find pullers that actually helped with the pulling. At first, when I started looking for higher-end arrow pullers, I found this one made by Top Hat. It cost about $120, and I think it's been discontinued, probably for good reason. It's made in Germany, and it has a similar layout as the Double D puller, but instead of the joint being another spot to grip, the Top Hat has a steel half-cylinder on top of the pivot, and the grippers for the arrow rotate. So you attach it to the arrow as close to the target as possible, grip it tightly, and while you pull on the grip side, that cylinder presses against the target. It's a decent design and it kind of works on targets that are stiff enough for the cylinder not to sink into them. The problem is, because the arrow grippers move independently, it's rather awkward to get them lined up on the shaft, and it doesn't have a long enough stroke to break the arrow loose when the outside of the target is soft. So it's no real great loss that it's no longer being offered, so I won't dwell on it any further. So the next one I was reluctant to purchase due to the price, and then I just broke down and bought one after I grew tired of wasting energy pulling arrows. This beast is the Hamsky Arrow Jack. It is big, it is heavy, it costs $140 to $160 depending on where you look, and I think it is worth every penny. The Hamsky Arrow Jack has a long spring-loaded clamp to attach the arrow with a rubber insert, and it is operated by gripping this part with your hand firmly around the arrow and using your other hand to pull this lever. The lever is attached via linkages to this puck that presses against the target, and it does most of the pulling for you by utilizing mechanical advantage. The mechanism has enough travel to compress the soft material of a target to gain purchase and break the arrow loose from the cooler, stiffer material on the inside. I have used the Arrow Jack to pull arrows out of wood, horse, stall mat, and conveyor belt material with a fairly high degree of success. I've had a few arrows shot into wood that I was not able to get loose, but those were loosed from 70-pound bows with long draw lengths. I've also had issues with arrows that were wet and pulling them out of targets that were wet. So that's something to think about. You got to make sure everything's dry before you try to pull it. But that's also true of other pullers as well, so that's not exclusive to this one. So it's not perfect, but most of the time the worst thing that's happened was I got the shaft loose with the insert and point still stuck in the wood, and the owner of that shaft was happy with that result. So good enough for me. The original Arrow Jack is able to be configured for left or right-handed use by taking it apart and rearranging the position of this handle. That's why it has 2 extra sets of holes in it. I find having the handle on the opposite side of where I'm standing to be optimal because I grip the clamp with my right hand and I pull the lever with my left, like so. A few of the drawbacks of the Arrow Jack is that the original version is very utilitarian. The aluminum blocks it's made of have squared off edges that make gripping it hard enough to be effective on wood or harder materials uncomfortable. I was considering taking this one apart and doing a melt job on it with my belt sander, rounding off all the edges so I can really get a death grip on it. It'll scrape off all the anodizing, but it'll be much nicer to use, and I'll maybe get it Cerakoted. We'll have to see how its little brother does first. As I alluded to previously, the Arrow Jack is big and heavy, so as far as portability goes, your best bet is slipping the handle over the lip of your quiver and letting the rest of the puller's body hang exposed. The puck that presses against the target sits square and doesn't work as well on angled surfaces, though I haven't really had that issue. Also, if you shoot a lot of groups, you need enough room between the arrows to get the clamp in place, and you need enough exposed shaft to get the clamp around it, or you can squish your vanes. Though if you're sunk that deeply into the target, you might not need a puller to get it out anyway. That said, the Arrow Jack is less effective on targets that are very soft, such as bag targets full of old clothing. If you manage to pierce the cloth inside, the Arrow Jack needs to get deep enough into it to find enough resistance to push against it before it will extract the arrow. You're still probably going to have an easier time using this than any of the other options, but it's an issue I've encountered personally, so it's worth noting. I've been carrying one of these with me for a couple of years now, and I've yet to take a trip to the range where I didn't end up using it at least once, and I have zero regrets shelling out the money for it. And this year, for 2024, Hamsky is offering a new version, the creatively named Arrow Jack 2.0. So the Hamsky Arrow Jack 2.0 comes in at $149.99 and is similarly designed to the Arrow Jack, but with much more machining work for the sake of refinement. It has radiused edges on the corners of the clamp and the lever handle, but the other side where you grip and wrap your fingers around is still squared, so it's only halfway to where I actually want it. There are also plastic bushings around a lot of the joints and contact points, so it's not nearly as clanky as the original. The Arrow Jack 2.0 is a lot smaller and lighter than the original. The rubber inserts for the arrow clamp have been redesigned to supposedly be grippier, though I didn't have any issues with the original. The puck is more rounded and is able to pivot a little to conform to angled surfaces. The area of the body around the piston for the puck has been skeletonized for some reason, maybe weight savings or to make it easier to clean, maybe aesthetics. No idea, moving on. So compared to the original Arrow Jack, the 2.0 has a much shorter stroke. It's almost half of what the original has, and as a result, it may require additional pulls of the lever to break the arrow loose. It also does not have the ability to be configured for left or right-handed use. I don't care, really. The clamp is the same size, but with that shorter stroke, it ends up being a less effective tool in exchange for a more compact and portable design. It's still more effective than every other non-Hamskea offering that I've just mentioned. However, you're going to give up a lot of its usability for the sake of it being smaller and easier to carry. So to wrap things up, I would much rather make a one-time purchase of $150 to conserve a ton of energy I would have otherwise wasted pulling arrows, and saving that energy for drawing my bow and maintaining consistent form for a longer period. I very rarely shill for a product, but I think the original first generation of Arrow Jack is worth every penny. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments. Take care, stay safe, happy hunting, and I'll see you at TAC. Okay, so now I finally have something that's stuck. So after you spend all day chopping wood with your arrows, you finally manage to sink it into something that it won't come back out of. And in this case, you're going to try using your pullers. This one is split, so if it was anchored to something, it might make life a little bit easier. Nope, that's not coming out with that. There you go. Crappy puller, not so much. Double D. Granted, if it's anchored to something, that's going to make a difference. Yeah, that's not going to work. Arrow Jack. I'm going to try with this one because I know that it doesn't have as long of a stroke. The neat thing about it is I can just hold this here and it does all the pulling for me. All I have to do is make sure the clamp is... All I have to do is make sure that the clamp is on it. Nope. That one's not working either. Okay, so no go on the small Arrow Jack. Let's go with the big one. The big one has more surface area on the clamp here, and there's more rubber on the inside. There's about, or does it? No, the clamps are comparable. Just the stuff on the rubber on the inside is they supposedly improved it, but as you can see, this one just does a better job. The big boy just does a better job. So, there's your testing. I'm done chopping wood.